Welcome back, everybody. We're now in session 2. We've got 3 speakers for us today, starting off with Katie and Jack from Zappi. We've heard a bit about Zappi this morning from Mike in his presentation about the top 10 trends in survey research. So the presentation this morning is Unlocking the Hidden Potential in Surveys. Katie is, I've just completely lost where you are, apologies Katie, is Director of Research Services, is that correct? Solutions, apologies, and previously at Brain Juicer and Insight Marketing Planning. Jack is Director of Research Data, is that correct? Good. I obviously can't use LinkedIn correctly, apologies. Ex-GFK and JD Power, and I'll just hand the floor to them now. 20 minutes, guys. Here we go.
Yes, as James said, I'm Katie, and Jack will be up in a moment. I like to think we are two sides of the same coin in terms of solutions. I put a lot of focus in how we bring the data in, what questions do we ask, and Jack does a lot of the magic in terms of how we analyze and leverage that data. So just briefly, as you have to, a little bit about Zappi, though thank you very much to Mike for already introducing us today. Zappi is a platform that captures data for creators. We're all about the freshest thinking, flexible technology, and the fastest answers. In terms of the surveys that we capture, we're largely focused in advertising, shopper, as well as innovation. So without further ado, the topic of the day. How can we unlock the hidden potential of surveys using connectivity to get more from your data? Before I get into that, I wanted to think a little bit about why is this important and what is the wider business context, because as James said very smartly this morning, our customers are not talking about methodology, though they do want to know that we bring that excellence. We really need to anchor ourselves in that wider business and their wider business challenge. And to me, when I thought about why is it important to unlock the hidden potential of surveys, it's really all about this importance of adaptability. Our customers are really striving to be adaptive. They have to flex and respond to changes in the marketplace. In fact, Forrester has found that adapted enterprises are growing at 3 times faster than their competition. So how do they do this? BCG has done a brilliant piece of research. I definitely encourage you to read into what they've done, where they've identified 8 steps that businesses need to take in order to achieve adaptability, or what they call adapted advantage. Looking at this list of 8 here, I hope you're all seeing some huge opportunities for the insights industry, and survey in particular, for us to be a real important part of this adaptive advantage that customers are building as a part of their business. Just a few things that were really interesting to me here that really touch on the things that have been coming up today. Number 3, investing in tools and capabilities. That's exactly what a lot of us here do today. Thinking beyond themselves as a unit of analysis. I think it was Mike that was talking about that kind of interconnectivity of data across different platforms and systems. That's really important to bring internal, external, and all of those different data systems together, not just what you have in your own house. And another one that I think is really important is number 6, embracing ecosystem participation, and that's something I really want to focus on today. Our surveys are a part of the broader ecosystem, and I think crucially can be a real backbone of that ecosystem from both an insights but also a broader marketing and brand perspective. But it's not really looking great at the moment. BCG also found that 85% of business ecosystems fail, including insights. This is a really hard challenge to achieve. So we're going to provide you some tips of how you can help improve this. On the flip side of that, some are succeeding. I think Frank Santiago is a really brilliant pioneer in this field at Colgate. He's really focused on knowledge management at Colgate, and has found that once you do build those ecosystems and you figure out how to make them work, the impact that they can have on your business is exponential. So this unlocking the hidden potential of surveys isn't just about getting more from your data. It's about ensuring the success of these crucial insights ecosystems, which are critical to the overall success of businesses and achieving those goals of adaptability moving forward. So some things to think about when you're developing an insights ecosystem. There are 3 areas that we tend to focus on. The first is around standardized solutions, so thinking about the types of tools and questions, particularly things that are repeated over and over again. How can you get to a level of standardization that will enable you to create more impactful data? The second is around audiences. It's not just about the questions you ask, it's who you ask, and particularly who you ask in a consistent way so that that data can be leveraged for the third thing, which is meta-analytics. It's not just what can that survey do for you today, but what can that survey do for you in a year's time when you've used it over and over and again, and you can actually get to broader, more thematic insights. And that's something that Jack's going to talk on when I'm finished. So thinking about that, the notion of standardized systems, I think the key is to really start with where the business is. What is their structure? How do they approach advertising development or innovation or shopper or whatever the particular area of the business that you're trying to work in? This is just an example. This is how Zappi talks about it, but I'm sure you've seen this sort of thing before. Every business has their language and their processes. And the key for surveys to be successful is to embed yourself in that ecosystem, find the part of the process or parts of the process that you're playing in, and think about how you can drive decisions there and live within the wider ecosystem. So I wanted to walk you through an example of a business that does this very well. PepsiCo has been building out their insights ecosystem for a few years now, and one of their earliest wins was actually around early concept testing, and they recognized that sort of in a world where all of their business were interconnected and operating in silos, they were actually fighting and competing for consumer share of mind. So they'd be doing their concept testing in different areas and not really building a cohesive platform or portfolio-based strategy. So they took the insights team took this head on, and they worked with these different brands to come up with a more cohesive innovation strategy that crossed their entire portfolio. And they were really successful. They developed a systematic approach with iterative testing. They started with an exploration white stage ideation, developing platforms and identifying those tensions that then the businesses could think about how they tackle that. They created 37 early stage concepts across the different brands. They tested those, they went back and refined them, and they continued to use that systematic approach in the same, in a consistent way, and ultimately landed on 7 winning ideas. And I think the thing that really made this work is that they pulled the team together, but they leveraged consistent approaches. They had Doritos, Cheetos, Ruffles, and Lay's all speaking the same language and thinking about how those innovations can impact their portfolio in the same way. And that's something they've been carrying through for the last few years and quite successfully building more impactful portfolio strategies. So they're not competing for consumer share of mind. They're actually capturing a much wider piece of the pie by working together and breaking down those silos and using a more systematic approach. So I'm going to hand it over to Jack to talk about audiences and meta-analytics.
Hey guys. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the analytical benefits of creating an insights ecosystem. So the first thing I want to talk about really is sampling. So got on the slide here, we talk a lot about consistent sampling, and there's quite a lot of benefits to doing that. So the most one is obviously comparability, right? If you sample consistently for every concept you test, every ad that you test, you can compare all of them to each other. In addition to that, your norm or your benchmark is also composed of stimuli that were tested using the same audience. Clearly, that allows for a more rigorous action standards, a fair comparisons that are made when you're doing analytics on your surveys. When you've got a different target group used for every survey, it's hard to know if the differences in scores that you see are actually genuine creative or concept, quality differences, or the differences that are driven just by differences in sample. So aligning on sample is obviously, hugely important from that comparability perspective. At Zappi, we always say that it's really important to us that any differences in scores that we see within a product, within a client, are driven by creative quality and not driven by differences in methodology. The other, real big benefit of using a consistent audience is, well, there's a benefit for Zappi. It makes our projects field quickly. But in addition to that, it's the breadth of the audience. So frequently, clients will come to us. They'll have a kind of a target group in mind. Often it's quite narrow, maybe users of the brand, something like that. We always push back and we say, look, screen at the category level. The rationale for that really is twofold. One of those is kind of around, the automation that I mentioned earlier. But the other one is around data quality. So, we've done quite a lot of ROR on this, and we see that, again, when we're trying to kind of curate our norms, we see that having these high IR broad target groups leads to greater stability when we do a test retest with the same stimuli. In addition to that, it presents opportunities for our users to find opportunities that they might miss. So, if they come to us with this kind of preconceived notion of who their target group is for their product, we can maybe, sometimes identify potential users of the product they could have missed through, that very tight, narrow screening. And, all of that comes out in the analysis. Just one other, oh no, I'll go on to the next one actually. So it's not just about consistency in audience. The other part of the puzzle is consistency in solution or questions that you ask. So, there's a number of benefits to always asking the same questions as well. So I just realized I missed the mic then. So when you run hundreds of research products using the same KPIs, the same audiences, you can start to unlock these meta-learnings. A good example of this is around subgroups, right? So frequently, when you're doing a market research project, you're comparing your sample or a subgroup of your sample, say, I don't know, users of your brand in your test against a norm that is composed of hundreds of ads. Now, if you don't have the same questions asked over and over again or use the same audiences over and over again, you can't filter that norm, right? So a key part of the way that we conduct subgroup analysis at Zappi is something called profiles, which is basically just every cell that contributes to a norm is filtered in the same way as the cell in question is when you're comparing an ad or a concept, right? What that means is when I look at my scores for young males or brand users, not only are they filtered, but the norm's filtered too, and it's a fair comparison. Clearly, that's not possible unless you do, this kind of structure around both the questions you ask and the audiences that you use. The other thing that we do is tagging. So at Zappi, we encourage our users to run meta-analytics or connected learnings at kind of the ad scale. So, rather than one respondent, being one row of data, we'll take a cell as a row of data, an ad or a concept. We'll aggregate all of those up, and then we'll ask our users to tag them according to different hypotheses. So a good example of this is a large telco client that we have in the US. They do a lot of creative testing with us. They tag all of their adverts for either brand-based advertising or offer-based advertising. So offer-based advertising being things like promos, things like that, new iPhone, cheap, that sort of thing. Because they've sort of segregated their data in that way, and they've got those two different kind of databases. So the first benefit is obviously normative, right? It means that they can take all of their brand-based adverts and compare them to a norm of brand-based adverts alone. The other benefit is kind of a little bit more sophisticated than that, which is when it comes to running actual analytics on the data, having them structured in that way allows for some really great comparisons. So, for example, if you've got your, you do a key drivers analysis, which you can do on our platform, click of a button, you can really compare, what drives success in brand-based advertising against what drives success in offer-based advertising in seconds, right? And it's really helps them hone the specific messaging that they're using in each of those creatives. I'm just going to talk you through one other example now. So this is McDonald's. So they've tested hundreds of concepts on our platform, around hundreds of thousands of respondents, and they did some meta-analysis on that work. So this is specifically around chicken burgers, actually, right? So the way that McDonald's test is basically they separate by occasion. So all of their concepts that they come up with, an idea for a new chicken burger or I don't know, a new breakfast wrap are kind of separated by occasion, and within occasions they use standard measures, and within those measures they use standard messages. So an example of a message here being something like I'd feel good feeding my family, or it looks healthy, right? They'll always use the exact same ones for all of their testing for an occasion. Now there's a huge benefit for that, right? Which is that because they've got hundreds of concepts tested in exactly the same way, they can run one of these key drivers analyses, and they can see within an occasion, so the occasion here being chicken dinner, or chicken burgers for dinner time, they can see really what drives success of the top concepts there. So this is real data from McDonald's. It doesn't have the values on it, but we ran the KDA, and there's two drivers that come up consistently to the top. One is that I'd feel good feeding my family this, and then the other one is that it would be of a high quality. So McDonald's were able to take this learning. They were able to activate this learning in a creative campaign. So the actual data came from concept. They took this into kind of their creative ecosystem. They were able to make a advert called Dinner Grandma, which is basically a sort of southern US grandma being happy to feed a chicken burger to her kids. And the ad was really successful. Right? It drove success in market. There's a testimonial on the bottom right there from the client. But none of that would have been possible without testing the same, using the same methodology with the same sample and the same questions. So that's really the kind of business benefits that this ecosystem approach can unlock. I'm going to hand back to Katie now.
I think one other thing to add to this that I thought was really interesting is this is the connection between innovation testing all the way through to creative and using consistent approaches and platforms across. And I thought that was really exciting because I think, to me, that's often one of the biggest challenges because businesses operate in silos in terms of this team over here is developing the product, this team over here is working on the comms. but McDonald's was able to, the insights team in particular, was able to operate at a really strategic level, review all of their concept testing, and as MPD was getting ready for launch, actually say, we think your messaging strategy should be this on the basis of what we learned from the concept testing. And that really came from that connectivity of data that they built in that ecosystem. So just a final recap of our 3 recommendations for how you can get more from your data. The first is to focus on strengthening business processes with standardized research solutions. So really think about the wider context in which your solutions are operating. Create a consistent consumer connection. Really think about potentially using broader audiences that you can use more consistently at scale. And the third is take the opportunity to unlock that foresight, just like McDonald's did, as well, and leverage those comparable data assets that you've created. Questions?
I have a question. Thanks, Katie. I just wondered whether you'd come across any friction between the advantages, obviously, of consistency and keeping things the same, and whether or not does that ever affect the ability to make progress? And I'm thinking specifically around inclusion and trying to make research more representative. And what we're finding when we speak to people about that is a lot of the time it means that people need to change the questions they're asking and the responses that they're offering and the people that they are sampling in order to try and make it more representative of the UK. And when we speak to people about that, they do say one of the barriers to progress is this kind of need to keep consistency. And I just wondered if you had any advice for people who are trying to have consistent data sets, but also at the same time are trying to make real improvements in inclusion and representation, and how do you kind of square that circle?
We definitely get that question a lot, and I think it is that it is a challenge, and I think it's where a lot of the idea of going wider and collecting potentially more sample than you think you initially need. I think we've historically, as an industry, operated on relatively small 150 sample sizes for things like concept testing, and we're constantly chopping and changing. If you, in setting up your ecosystem and approach to research, think about that wider need that you might not be wanting to, you might not necessarily think today for this particular test, I need to interview all these different audiences. But actually, if you think in a year down the line, I want to know what those audiences are thinking, and having collected a large data set that you can then mine will offer more insights into a much more diverse set of people than if you're only ever looking point in time at a single test. I don't know. Exactly. Jack, did you want to?
Yeah, it's a challenge I'm working on at the moment, quite closely. I think the key thing for me is there's 2 parts of it methodologically, probably. One is when you implement first of all, I think that the real key point is progress should never be avoided, right? We never want to be in a position where, to safeguard our norms or our benchmarks, we're not doing things better. That would be ridiculous. So we always need to, when we design anything, think this needs to be future-proof, right? And obviously, as researchers, we've got tools to do that. So, obviously, weighting is your friend. Our platform's got the ability to do norms for subgroups. That's hugely helpful as well. And I think it's just making sure that, when you design a new question, it's backwards compatible. An example for us is obviously for things like ethnicity. We're trying to move from a world where we are single-coded variables around what your ethnicity is to multi-code. That data is fundamentally, hard to compare, of course it is, but at least we can try to create sensible nets of multi-codes that are somewhat compatible with the, the back single-coded variables that we had, and then reweight that back data to match the new nets that we create for multi-codes.
Thank you. Yeah, I love the fact that you can create benchmarks. I mean, that's the whole point of having standardized research. But how does it work with your clients? Do they agree to share their data so you can have like a combined benchmarks? And how does that work? Do you get creative tension there, like sales tension? Or?
So in the nitty-gritty, there's a couple of ways it works. For things like profiles, yes, the client share, so it just goes into our database, and in the same way as Kantar would offer a norm based on all link studies across clients, we will do that, and we'll do that at the subgroup level. In addition to that, though, where a client has done their own tagging, so where they say, this advert is of a creative nature or a brand nature versus the example I used earlier, that would be bespoke to that client only. So tags aren't shared in the wider system. they're client only, and they can create what's called a user-defined benchmark from their own tagged data. But the kind of broader subgroup level stuff is system-wide. And we also have an initiative at the moment where we structure the data ourselves. So we're doing some basic taxonomization of our creative and concept tests to kind of allow those kind of more filtered, more relevant benchmarks.
Any other questions at all?
Thanks, guys. Very interesting. So a couple of points from this morning's sessions are around self-serve and allowing clients to access survey tools themselves. There's some concerns in the room from some people that can mean that people that aren't so trained in research design can make mistakes. I'm assuming that you guys template each of these products and try to remove any potential for errors that clients might make. Getting some nods. When it comes to interpreting, what does Zappi offer clients to making sure that mistakes aren't made in the interpretation? You mentioned it from innovation right through to messaging. There's two quite different schools of insight experience. Tell us a little bit about how you help clients make decisions from the data.
Well, first off, you can also template the analysis and the reporting side as well. So there are some relatively quick wins and simple answers that can be provided even in a templated self-serve world. And we're constantly trying to elevate that. How can we continue to deliver even more complex analyses and answers in a safeguarded way that the user doesn't need to be an insights expert to appreciate the recommendation? But the other side of that is there is always going to be value in consultancy, particularly in kind of marrying the two worlds of what research does, what the research says, and that business context. Because even as plugged in as your tools are to that wider ecosystem, making those connections between what the business strategy is for any given initiative and what consumers are saying is inherently a human job. And I think that's actually where the real opportunity for insights professionals is. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of our customers focusing on in terms of how they recruit their insights teams. They're looking for storytellers and business partners who can draw those two worlds. So it's about kind of surfacing those simple answers in an automated way as much as you can, but also welcoming in consultants where that advanced support is required.
One thing to that. I think just one thing to add to that as well is, this is about ecosystem. Ecosystem breeds simplicity. If you do have a standardized process, if you're using 2 or 3 tools for your innovation process and 1 or 2 tools for your creative process, you don't need to be an insights expert. You need to be an expert in the implementation of those specific tools. So when you create a ecosystem that a user uses over and over again, they become familiar and they start to think within those frameworks. So I think that's part of the behavior change too.
Thank you.
Over there. Bounce me around the room.
This is going to come across as a very aggressive question, and I don't mean it to be an aggressive question. It's a genuine question. Do you really believe that the sort of norms that you describe and the standardization that you describe can lead to high quality? Because my worry is it leads to a world of beigeness. And I look at a break in the middle. We're just having this conversation. I look at a break in the middle of Coronation Street, and it's terrible. And the person I was talking to said, I don't even watch them. And that's what worries me, is that we're creating a real beige middle. And even McDonald's go from creative genius to absolute pap. And it really worries me that you're drawing people, not you, I don't mean you, but that this sort of system is drawing people to a middle, and a dull middle, rather than creative excellence, shall we say?
I think that's a good challenge. Look, I think realistically, you need to think about action standards more than anything. So we're not necessarily saying always. I think the role of a system like this is really to filter out the real crap to a large extent. So, certainly using a unified system of this type, you would not let any terrible ads come through. What we would never want is for it to stop, to stand in the way of creative genius, right? So I think one important part of the story is things like benchmarking, is things like KPIs, is those very close measures. The other part of our platform that we're quite proud of that works in an automated way is the verbatim analysis. So and I think always where you see that creative genius come through, you're going to see people talk about the creative in a more human way through those open-enders. What we're quite good at doing is using the machine learning models we've got, classifying those verbatims into particular topics, and then really sort of highlighting those key topics to our users with, examples, drill down functionality, all of that stuff. So in answer to your question, the best response I think I can give you is that I would hope a user of our platform would both ensure that their creative is of a given level of success using the KPIs, using that, and then kind of drill down more into the actual storytelling, human aspects, with the open responses. I'd also add, I think that's a problem with the system across our industry in general. But what we're really trying to do is just ensure that, our particularly, larger customers have that baseline level of creative quality.
Time for one more. It was really just building on Paul, the MRS, and I think it was Savanta did a study that's probably still on the MRS website called Intelligence Capital that you may have seen. It's well worth reading, actually. It really is good. And what they discovered talking to clients was essentially, and I'm sure I'm paraphrasing, but research briefs went into two buckets. One was basically real insight, as I would consider it, and maybe Paul would, which is a really breakthrough idea that might change the business, and the other was essentially A/B testing in equivalent, or is it good enough, high, low. And I think in a way it depends what the brief is. So the beige, I think if you brief beige, you get beige. I think if you brief the Cadbury Gorilla, well, I don't think anyone briefed the Cadbury Gorilla. You get you get a real insight and a breakthrough. And I think that for me is my worry, which is if you play in the insight thing and you're doing beige testing, you're in the wrong place. And I think it's just fitness for purpose, really. So that was more of a statement than a question. Apologies, it was meant to be a question, but I think I've just answered my own.
No, I think we've got. Can you remember Kev's example? Kev's example of the really weird PepsiCo ad. That wasn't Kev's.
Happy monkey baby.
Yeah. So I think in response to that, there is. So our creative testing methodology, our sort of more enterprise one, has a prediction model in it. Basically it's taken mixed market modeling data and we run, machine learning models against that using the KPIs. What we found out was a lot of the, I hate to use this word, but more of the system one KPIs, things around verbatims, things around, whether or not users skip the ad, how much of the ad they watch, did prove to be quite predictive for that kind of more off-the-wall, weirder creative. So we created this tool in partnership with PepsiCo. They've got a very weird ad called Puppy Monkey Baby, or something? Yeah, Puppy Monkey Baby. We tested it in the new methodology. That was one of our standards for success, was those weird ads, and it did pretty well in the new methodology we made with them. So I guess that's my attempt at a defence for that point.
Thank you for sharing so much knowledge.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, guys. Slight technical issue going on here, never mind. Thank you very much. So we're moving on to the second of our three speakers in this session, which is Adam Weiss or Weiss? Weiss. Weiss. We're going to go for the American. He's all the way from America.
Yes.
All the way from, especially to be with us. So you're from Cint.
Yes.
You've been at Cint a really long time.
Yes.
LinkedIn was quite. I could read that LinkedIn profile and not get it wrong. And Adam's going to talk about how surveys are better connected.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me, all the way from America. My name is Adam Weiss. I work for Cint, which is a large insights exchange. I've been there for 8 years, which all my friends tell me is a lifetime in millennial. My experience specifically is mostly in API integrations, working with suppliers who integrate to our exchange, as well as buyers who integrate to our exchange. So we have here quickly the Adam Weiss pillars of efficiency, patent pending, based on three things: standardization, automation, and innovation. I'm not going to talk about the second two very much today. The kind of buzzword for today is standardization. The other two, automation and innovation, obviously you are only as efficient as your competition, especially when it comes to automation and programmatic work. But really, I think the benefits of the exchange come with standardization. And when it comes to working with survey tools and a lot of our clients, that standardization of not only profiling, project structure, adds for a lot of efficiencies. So for those who are unfamiliar, the Cint model as an exchange, we essentially connect to thousands of panel companies. We integrate them to our system. We communicate them through quick API communications. And then on the flip side, we work with demand-side clients. We work with survey tools, market research firms, people who are looking for respondents. We bring thousands of them to the marketplace through our DIY software or our API integrations. Now, some of the standardization benefits. First, uniform profiling and targeting. So bringing together lots of different supply sources, things like household income brackets, just the way you ask and answer questions. By standardizing in one place, funneling all of your respondents through these single version of questions and answers, you can really make that system uniform. You can make that repeatable, reliable, and consistent. We also allow you to add scale. So instead of adding a second, third, fourth supply system to your own ecosystem, adding new invoicing structures, adding new question and answer types, by having that come through the exchange, you're still only working with one place. All of that is, you essentially can scale up without having to add a bunch of new processes to your system. And the last two, layered quality measures and layered external data, is actually what I really want to focus on today. So how do we use an exchange to both standardize our information and standardize our quality measures, both with respondents going into surveys and respondents coming out of surveys? And then what kind of external data we can add to that, and how it helps to have one uniform place to get that data. So first we'll do a case study in the quality transformation. So this is really how we get quality measures standardized on respondents going into a survey. So this is the Cint marketplace, essentially. On the top, you have research and data platforms. That would be survey tools, other market research firms. On the bottom, you see strategic panel partners. Those are some of your existing panel sources that are integrated to our system. You have our Cint blended exchange, which is all of our other panels that are integrated to our system. And for some of our clients, their own recruiting methods, their own recruiting panelists. So the research team, the data platforms, the survey tools, are coming to us with an order, right? They have an audience that they're trying to define. We use our sample engine to take all of those respondents, and we put them through an initial quality test. So those quality tests on the way in include geo-IP testing to make sure users aren't using a VPN. We're doing duplicate checks. I think this is really one of the most powerful ones. If you're using multiple supply sources, one of the hardest things is to be able to track, are we getting duplicate entries? If you're funneling them all through the exchange, if you're funneling them through all through one system, we can tell you not only based on existing panelist IDs, but also based on the browser fingerprint, if that person has already entered that study. So we're taking the burden of that duplicate security off of the survey tool, off of the market research company. We also have connections to third-party fraud ID companies, the Imperiums of the world, allowing us to, again, take on that burden for you instead of you having to have that relationship. Some of the quality measures, in the world of market research, it takes a village to keep up panelist quality, right? We're relying on suppliers to make sure that they are not recruiting poor quality respondents. We are relying on the survey tools to make sure they're adding things like red herrings, making sure that they're adding quality measures. And then as the player in the middle, the exchange, we want to add as many quality measures as we can as well. And one of those is asking the survey tools to help us attack the quality problem when people are finishing a survey. So not just making sure that we're keeping bots or poor respondents from starting the survey, but things like link manipulators, people are hopping survey to survey. It's really, we're relying on the actual tool itself to tell us, is this a genuine user? One of the biggest strengths we have is using server-to-server communications to eliminate that reliance on browsers. Browsers, whether it's actually nefarious or just by accident, can be incredibly unreliable. People leaving windows, pages not loading, things like that. So in order to mark people as positive completes, good quality, genuine screenouts, genuine over quotas, we have a system in place that allows you to tell us that with an authenticated server connection that is not reliant strictly on the person being redirected back to the right browser page. We also have API endpoints that allow you to do link validation. So you can reach out to us and say, is this the right user for the right study, before you send them back to us saying they are a completed qualified survey respondent. When it does come to using browser redirects, we also use specific project tokens. So a respondent who comes to one of your surveys doesn't have the ability to then essentially cheat to the end, cheat to the browser, redirect for every study that you have. We separate by project. So next I want to talk about connected data. I was really excited because I thought I invented this idea of connecting first-party data with third-party or more passive data, but it turns out every single person has talked about that already, so I guess it's not brand new to the space, but I do think that the exchange offers a really unique and powerful way to connect that third-party data, to connect essentially that passive data to survey respondents and first-party self-reported profiling information. So historically, these things were siloed. First and third-party identifiers, cookies, impression IDs, those all sort of lived on their own and hard to connect. What we're seeing now is, as we've talked about a lot today, is those things are being connected. We are being able to set up things like identity graphs, data lakes, in order to take an individual and start layering on big data from things like CRMs, DMPs, geolocation data, targeted surveys, all of that into one place. Using an exchange like Cint allows you to standardize that process, to layer on new forms of data over time into one single identity graph in an easy place to then reach out to those respondents. So this is going to look very familiar to a previous slide. The marketplace model works the same way for surveys as it does for a lot of these data connections. Now we are just bringing in other data sources. So you see we have things like cookieless measurement from companies like connected data TV companies, the Rokus of the world. We also have brought in connections to data matching companies, the DMPs, the CRMs, and those third-party connections. So all of this data is now being layered into that exchange, into the place where we're doing those quality score checks, into the place where you are getting your profiling questions. Those respondents are being registered. We're remembering a lot of their profile, that first-party self-reported information to us. We can now layer in all of these third-party data sources, all of these passive data sources to essentially make the most of that combination. So you see we have these all layered in. Everything from GeoIP to shopper data, website data, survey data is all coming into one opportunity, one insights exchange. So talking about the future of connected data, I think our goals at the company are really to be able to combine those incredibly powerful data sources, whether it's true sources of information like first-party self-reported that may be smaller, along with those third-party large passive data that may be a little bit less reliable. We ideally want to make those greater than the sum of their parts. We want to be able to take those two versions of data, combine them into one identity graph, and give clients sort of the best of both worlds. The last two here are really our responsibility to the consumer. I think this is something that gets forgotten a lot when we talk about data, is the importance of consent, the importance of giving the consumer a feeling like they're actually getting something for their data. And we see that the future-proof, sort of thinking about future-proof solutions, we have things like GDPR. In the US, we have a California Data Protection Program. The consumer does not necessarily want their data to just be sold and shared without their knowledge. They want to be able to opt in. They want to be able to share. And they want to get something back for it. So people are willing to share their GeoIP data to Google Maps because Google Maps can then tell them how long it takes to get to the airport, right? There's a give and take with consumers and their data. And I think historically, companies have sort of been taking a lot of this passive data, their browser histories, their cookie IDs, behind the scenes and not really returning anything back to the user except for possibly a better advertising experience. I think the consumer wants more than that. And they're willing to share it. They're willing to give that information, but they want something in return. So what we have in this world, in the market research world, is a really unique opportunity to actually pay people for their data, right? We can layer this passive data into first-party data, and then we can go out and interview those people. We can incentivize them. We can pay them. So I think it's a win-win for both parties, not just for the actual consumer, who's getting officially rewarded for the information, their data that's being shared, that's being sold. But also we are getting a richer data set, a more trustworthy data set by actually interviewing those people, by taking that passive data and layering it on a more reliable, consistent data marketplace. So I think that is really where the market research industry has a huge leg up on a lot of the big data world, is we can give back to that consumer, we can connect the consumer, and they're going to be willing to share more. They're going to be willing to tell us more information about themselves because they're getting something out of it. They're getting incentivized. All right, thank you very much.
Lots of questions.
Good.
Just first person, okay.
Thanks. Really interesting, and the bit that struck me was merging in all of those data sets for connected TVs and those bits and pieces. Given that the quality, you've got 4,500 panels or whatever connected in, and the quality work that you do is like this just perpetual whack-a-mole, trying to make sure that everybody complies. How do you manage the privacy implications across so many suppliers and so much of that stuff that could go really badly wrong? I mean, I get you've got your own protections, but
Yes, a very robust, busy legal team. I think a big part is actually asking consent to all these people. Like, we have a very robust consent page because everyone who comes to the exchange is stopping at a Cint domain page. So we can ask for that consent, and we're very specific when we work with partners, both buyers and suppliers, the ability to delete data, right? To have people ask to be removed. We make that a priority that our partners are compliant. And part of that is our history, because we do come from a Swedish company, when the workings of GDPR were coming out years before, it was something, at least in America, none of our clients in America were thinking about, worrying about. But it was a top priority for us. And I think our team saw that having robust consent, not just for ourselves and the data that we hold, but the data that we share back to our partners, is very, very compliant with the most stringent worldwide compliances.
Did you have a question?
Hiya. You talked a couple of times though about consistency of response or consistency of data. Given our model that I went through earlier around benchmarking and norms are very important to us. Obviously, respondent quality is too, non-fraudulent and paying attention, but consistency of response is really important. Given that you are composed of many, many different sample sources on an exchange, obviously we set quotas, for things like age, gender, whatever else. So, typically 5 or 6 different quota variables. But how do you control the latent characteristics that might exist across different sample sources within your ecosystem? So if I collect responses from Cint, obviously it's, each time I run a survey, it could come from many different sample sources within the exchange.
Yep.
How do you ensure that in terms of any latent characteristics that aren't controlled for in quotas, ensure that the responses we would get cell on cell are similar?
Sure, absolutely. I think there's actually a lot of power in blending multiple supply groups, because the biases that come from maybe one recruitment source. I think the power in numbers, right? The power in the difference in number of suppliers actually makes for a more accurate, I guess, blend or accurate sample size of the community as a whole. But if you don't believe that, we also allow you to pick and choose exactly what of our suppliers you're working with. So if you only want to use, we're very transparent with everyone we work with. It is not a black box. You can go to our DIY tool and you can see literally every supplier that's integrated into our open exchange. If you only want to work with 3 of them, if you only want to work with 1 of them, you can pick and choose. You can set quotas on those suppliers. So you can be very particular about the supply source that you're getting from us if you do not want to use the blend itself.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks. Danger of being a little short on the 20 minutes is to get more questions from
Yes.
me. Sorry about that. So, question about standards, but not actually respondent quality and those kind of standards. I do happen to agree that having a sample of panels, as well as samples within those panels, is a good thing. My question is more around standards of connecting to different exchanges. There's quite a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to connect survey platforms to the exchanges, whether that's manually or in an automated way. I've heard people at Cint and other businesses talk about standards of connecting. Like how should the industry, of which you've got people here today, consider standards for connecting to sample sources? Should there be standards, like we talked about the TS API that Mike mentioned earlier for exchanging data? Should there be standards? If so, how do we go about doing that? Are they really needed in the industry?
Yeah, I think that there has always been an appetite for standardization, especially when it comes to things like I mentioned, profiling questions, right? A standard household income breakdown that we just don't really have. It's the kind of thing that I think everyone talks about wanting, but then the decision of like who sets the standard, everyone wants to use their historic version, right? They want to use their breakdown. So I think we are getting better about really like working together as an industry, I think. Doing conferences like this, the problem is I think a lot of people want to use their existing, they don't want to give up kind of the way they work or the breakdowns that they have. One thing that does help, I think, with working with exchanges and some standardization is when it comes to things like quality. We have all of these different methods. We have hashed redirect methods. We have server-to-server connections. We have tokens. We have all these different things. And I think part of the challenge is deciding not just like which one is best, but maybe which one is the easiest to implement across a bunch of different partners. And that's a challenge that we have right now. We have a couple of different methods for our most secure link verifications, our most secure redirects, our highest quality measures. And it's a challenge sometimes to go to a client and say, well, here's our 3 different methods. We're going to give you the opportunity to choose the one that like works best for your system. So there's, I think, some benefits in variability. You can make things or use methods that are best for certain clients, but it definitely, I guess, hurts the scale when it says, all right, I'm going to integrate to 3 or 4 partners, 3 or 4 exchanges. I have to do things over, start from scratch for each one.
Sure. Thank you very much. Jerome can go next.
On the same subject, I don't have the mic, but there's an initiative led by John Paulson from Kantar Profiles about changing the way those profiling questions are done, and I suggest everyone should get in touch with him. But the idea is to say, if you ask, what is your highest level of education, there's a bias in there because you will be tempted to lie about it. So he tested it because that's what he does, but asked, what did you do after school, and then what did you do after that, and that brings like a much better way of capturing demographics. Same for the income, instead of asking how much you earn, which doesn't mean the same thing in Mexico and in Luxembourg, then what do you own in your house, etc., etc. So please get in touch with John, who's a good guy.
Oh, you've got one more. Thanks. Sorry, got lots of questions. We talked about quality of respondents a bit. What about quality of research companies and the surveys that they deploy into your exchanges? I've seen some shockers. I sign up for surveys. I love a good survey. I always answer honestly that I'm in market research. If they ask me, they don't very often, and I would fall out. But I see some absolutely terrible surveys, both in types of question, the experience I get as a respondent, dropouts, late screeners. Some of that's covered in some of the industry guidelines, some isn't. What's Cint's view on that? What's your view? What could we do better as an industry?
I think trust and verify is probably our stance. We don't want to assume that our clients are putting in horrible garbage surveys, but we also can't blindly trust them. So as a technology company, I think we struggled a little bit with this idea of how many human hours, how many people do we employ to actually go through and test a survey before we launch it, before we expose it to our panelists in a way to protect them from either surveys that were asking for overly personal information or maybe showing more explicit content or whatever it is. So that is something that we try and balance, of being able to work fast, having you order from us and instantly be able to get a respondent in 2 minutes, versus pumping the brakes, maybe waiting 30 or 45 minutes to actually test a survey. So we try and balance that. When we're working with new clients, we do not let them essentially just pump the exchange with surveys of any type. We do some verification testing. And then once we start to grow and have some comfort, once we have some trust with them, then we're much more likely to essentially put their emphasize for time instead of for quality. The other thing we have is we have automated stops in our system. So a great client can potentially make a mistake on a survey and have some broken logic. We have stops in place that will automatically stop a project if there's X number of dropout rate. Automatically stop a project if the qualification rate is too low for country standards or below what they sort of input the number at. And then we will tell our suppliers, here's the new updated actual conversion rate. So I think a mix of human validation and then technical system looking at statistics of projects is our best methods for making sure that we're protecting panelists and panels as well as survey tools.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Adam. We are on good time for our 1 o'clock lunch. So we have our third and final speaker for this morning's sessions, over the afternoon now, James Stewart, who's CTO for Delineate. I have no idea why his slides automatically moved forward, but they did. James is ex-Lloyds Banking Group, where he worked through the ranks for, I believe it was 17 years, from what was the original TSB to Lloyds Banking Group, and then joined Delineate a couple of years ago to lead the technology build there. So without further ado, James is going to join us to talk about advertising research and real time. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. I've started my stopwatch, so I know I'm between you and lunch, so I don't want to overrun. Thanks, Adam, for some of the heads up on time. So firstly, some of you might not know who Delineate are. We are a market research company, but we try to do things slightly differently. So whilst we have the rigor of market research, we're trying to underpin and fuse that with technology and really embrace some of the new technology out there that's now possible through cloud computing. So I'm going to talk about how we've embraced real-time or near-time as possible and how we're using that to support our clients and really fuel some of their business decision-making. So who am I? Thank you, JT. You said industry background with financial services. Well, I'm CTO for Delineate, so I look after all our technology. I do have quite a lot of technology background brand side, though, so working through financial services, utility brands, which is kind of helpful when you're running technology in a market research company. But I'm also a chartered marketer. So I've used substantial amounts of the data that the people in this room are generating, be it Kantar data, Ipsos data, data on qual, quant, etc. I've used to make decisions about campaigns that I've run, be them digital performance campaigns, be them above the line campaigns, etc. And then latterly in my campaign, I moved to digital, which is really that kind of where marketing and technology comes together. And being digital director, financial services, my last digital role was running digital for Co-op Bank up in Manchester. So a lot of experience with FTSE 10 to startups. And what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to do at Delineate is digitize the survey. So what that is not is building a pretty website, which is described as putting lipstick on the pig. What digitization really is about ripping up the rule book and going back through all the different things that we do for the respondent, the consumer, the technology, and looking at it from an end-to-end perspective and thinking about things differently. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about in the next 20 minutes. So what are the challenges for marketers? So the intro talked about ad research and why marketers need to understand how their campaigns are doing and how their creatives are doing and how they're performing and what's working and what's not working. They also really need to understand how their brand funnel is going. So the ultimate measure of do people love your brand, want your brand, is actually do they buy the product or the service? But you kind of need to know some steps back from that if you're actually going in the right direction. And then you need to identify new opportunities. So those threats and opportunities in the market from competitor, from consumers, What's going to be the next big thing? What do we embrace and where do we go with it? Those are the challenges that we help our clients day to day. And our typical client is an enterprise level. So Coca-Cola is one of our biggest clients. Ancestry we share in there as well. If you look at our website, we've got charities, we've got consumer goods, and financial services. So those are the challenges that I would have needed to answer as a marketer, and our clients want from us today. But when we've looked at market research, and this is where we came from with Delineate and how we embrace technology, some of the things that CMOs and CTOs of FTSE 250 and Fortune 100 companies said to us in some of our research about how they saw the response from the market research industry. So data's great. There's a substantial amount of data, every possible questions asked and answers to those, but sometimes there's too much data and not enough information. Data's collected over time, so it's great when we talk about waves, be them weeks, months, quarters, but the world's moved on. We've just had COVID, and things were changing day to day in response to government announcements, government policy, international changes. So having slow-moving data sets didn't really help brands understand where they went next or what was going on with their actual customers. And output tends to be analog. So there's a great credence in the crafting and the storytelling and the beauty of a PowerPoint deck. But if you're in a brand, that's not so great, people emailing things around. How do you actually get into the data and really understand it? What we've looked at is the opportunity and how we can flip some of these on the head. So we think about curated data sources. So really embracing those digital principles. So I would have talked in my digital world about service-based design. So thinking about the outcomes that you're trying to generate at the end rather than the start of the process. So lots of people think about, well, let's design the perfect survey. I think about how do you design the perfect outcome for the client. So you just want a couple of meaningful metrics that will drive business performance rather than the very large curated PowerPoint deck. Things that are close to the moment so you can actually understand what are consumers doing, where are they going next, and some of that prediction space. So rather than hypothesizing, you can start to see how the trend is changing as you go along through longitudinal data sets. And we're talking about tracking here. We're not talking about a series of dips. We're talking about an always-on capability. And then it's connected. So this is not about, hey, I've just emailed you a report. It's there's a dashboard inside your wall, inside your firewall that you're using to get the answers that you need, and people having conversations in brands about that data rather than we are trying to get them to read a PowerPoint deck. So flipping on the head with that. So how do we do this? Well, we talk about our 6 steps, and it's on our website. So the start and end of the process is about humans. That's about our people and how we work with our clients to design the right outcome for them. And we then embed that in their organization and help them get to understand it and get to use it. And so we call that client success. It's not about client servicing, it's about how we help them succeed and use that to make their business a better place. And then the bit in the middle is largely technology. So we collect the data and we're able to work with people like Cint who connect us to the world. We're able to work with people like Askia who help us with a platform that can take the data from consumers and process it. But then what we've done is looked at what's the right technology to manage data so that we can get that into that real-time space. So it's transformed, it's curated, and it's exposed, and our clients are using the data the next day. So when I was trying to understand how my campaigns were performing, I would get a report 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, 3 months after a campaign had finished. We'd already started the next one. So it would benefit the campaign after that or the campaign after that. What we're doing is able to serve our clients with a report, or they're using their own reports. Within 3 days, they're able to get a very accurate statistical read on how that campaign is performing and how that ad is working, which then means that you can actually do something about it as a marketer. And that becomes really exciting because there are so many levers out there now you can pull. You're actually able to pull them while stuff's going on. Data is curated, exposed, and all that's happening within our technological hub. So we haven't got lots of data processing effort, the tech's just making it happen. But as the themes for today talk about, it's all possible because of standardization, whether they be data standards, whether they be marketplace standards, whether they be questionnaire standards. The automation, so we're a startup, we're 27 people, we haven't got an army of 27,000 doing this stuff, and we couldn't afford to do that. So how do we embrace tech and cloud computing? I came from organizations that have billions of pounds worth of technology in their own proprietary data centers. Those companies are now moving it into the cloud where they're able to realize investment in innovation, etc. And we've been able to leverage that as a startup. And then finally, the connectivity. So this is about how we connect with other market research companies or market research suppliers, be it Cint, etc., but also our clients and the connectivity that they want. So our enterprise clients are demanding the data in their lake. They don't want us producing a proprietary report for them. They want it in there so that they can actually stack data sets together. So let's talk about a typical client use case. So within our world, we will collect the data, we will transform it, so we do meaningful things to it, be it weight the data, be it roll the data, so that you've got that kind of view that will help make things meaningful. But then we expose it. So we have API endpoints, they're all secured REST APIs, that our clients are pulling data into their data lake, and then they're using that data in their own reporting with our help to build stuff, or they're building it. They have data scientists, they have big analytics team. This is what they're doing. This is their bread and butter. Then in their world, they extract it, they process it. They're pulling that into systems like Google BigQuery, they're pulling it into Redshift, they're pulling it into Snowflake, and then they're using their own tools on top of that. They're not using SPSS files. They don't want SPSS files. They don't want those things. They want an open standard that works with these systems. They want to make market research data work for them, and not us work for them. So our data is going into Power BI, into Tableau. It's being reported, and it's being used by clients day to day, and they're having stand-ups around, so what happened with the advertising over the last couple of days, what direction is it taking, what things are we going to do. The marketers can actually have a meaningful conversation about this stuff. And then as a user, it's all about understanding it, taking that action, taking the in-flight decisions. So understanding, digital weight is this, or is that actually proving cut through? Do we need to reweight it? Do we need to have a conversation with the agencies and challenge what's happening? But also then just learn for the future, because you've got that data, you can then start building towards the next campaign, which would be in development, etc. So just kind of showing some client case studies. So one of our clients that we name, Coca-Cola. So through COVID times, they were using our data so that they could actually understand what's happening with consumers, not necessarily the advertising, but just societal factors, what's happening, and that longitudinal data. Jane made a comment this morning around how now is the perfect time for insight folk, and they're in the boardroom. We know that our data was in the boardroom and was being presented to James Quincy, who's the president of the Coca-Cola campaign, as a view of what's happening in Europe, which was like a big buzz when we found out something like that. Team Ancestry, digitally native business, incredibly data savvy, so much data coming from their own platform, like James was talking about with Spotify, etc. They're fusing our data in with that so that they're able to understand what's happening with consumers, and they're using their own Redshift and Tableau infrastructure to do that. We're not doing that for them. They're taking it and making that happen. So what I'd say from a implications perspective, the view that I gave earlier around CMOs and how CMOs and CTOs felt about the research industry, that would also be the sales pitch that I had from the likes of Google and Facebook when they're trying to sell me stuff. So they would say our data's great because it's fast, it's connected, you really get to understand what consumers are thinking. No, you don't. You get to understand what consumers are willing to share. And if you are a marketer and you've tried to use that data to manage your business, you will know, as Jane said, it's fool's gold. It is part of helping you understand that story, but it's not the entire story. Survey research has a really valuable role to play as Paul talked about, as people have talked about this morning, in helping understand that why and what consumers really are trying to do. So flipping on the head where things were seen as slow, disconnected and hard to handle, turning them into, you can make it fast, you can connect. It's not about transferring files from one organisation to another. It's about brands and enterprise being able to connect, consume, use, and report. But it's also really, really important we have the standardisation. So be that in the inputs or the outputs, how we talk to each other as the market research industry so that we can make this possible. And we don't see the threat as our competitors or market research industry, but definitely the likes of the social and the search companies and how we work collaboratively at an enterprise level, or how our enterprise clients use different data sources. And we have to remember, and I'm 3 years into the market research industry, and I hear, oh, market research is really, really hard. The data's really, really hard. I hear that in so many other industries. It's just data. It's response from a respondent, it's a base, it's numerators, it's denominators. You can do some really amazing stuff with the outputs of the data, but let's not underestimate there are data scientists in brands who are doing some phenomenally complex stuff, and they're solving really hard problems. And we can't say, oh, market research data is really hard to consume, because they'll just go, all right, fine, we won't use it then. We'll just move on and use the data from social and search, because that's really easy. I can get Google data in via an API and I can consume it and I can put it in a report. And you want to give me an SPSS table and I don't know how to use that. And so we'll bypass you and we'll look on to the next company. So what I would say as a kind of like a call to action is, we have to think about how we make things simple for our end users and for our brand clients. So that's it. Quick little case study in how you can make real-time ad research work.
Yep.
Thanks, James. I just wondered, based on what you were saying, are we seeing a trend of clients now wanting to combine survey data with other data sources, and are the in-house data scientists a threat to the average research company?
I think we are seeing a trend for data convergence. So be it search, be it social, be it ad spend data, different sources and first-party data that an organisation may have. So yes. Are data scientists a threat? No. But if we were to say we're not going to make things easy for them, absolutely, and they would discount us and move on by. And the way that we've been working with people is, hey, here's our data, and like we say, it's client success. So we really are democratizing our data, and we want our data inside your organization so that you're able to use it, leverage it, and realize the investment that you've made in collecting all these hundreds of thousands of consumer views. Let's not have it locked in a PowerPoint. Let's have it in your organization where you're able to use it to its greatest and full effect.
Any other questions, please? Did somebody see the word lunch on the... Yeah. Hi. So my question is more about the sort of term real time, because we've been probably talking about that, perhaps even like in the 30s and stuff like that, mass observation. I mean, when you've spoken to someone, you've got their opinion. That's real time. It's still days rather than seconds or minutes for your clients to get it. Do you find that it's that broad term that I'm talking about? You've got standardization, you've got surveys. Do your clients kind of use that term real time? They come to you with that feeling they need real time and you're closer to it? Or is there sort of another term that we're using these days, I don't know, closer to the moment or something like that? Just interested in that kind of real time, how they see it and how you see it.
So umbrella term for our platform is proximity. So really close to the moment. So one of the key use cases we have is around consumption. So at the moment of consumption, so we do day part sampling with our platform, and how we connect to the sample marketplaces as well, so that we're able to recruit people through day parts and get really accurate around that. So I guess near real time, the data, as you say, is collected in real time. If there's enough responses, it can be used the same day. it's all about what people are willing to pay for. If you've only got the view of 4 people, then you probably wouldn't want to give someone that in a day, because it wouldn't give an accurate view. But where our clients pay enough, within 24 hours they're able to use that data and consume it and make decisions on it, as long as there is enough of a representative sample. So each day is representative. It's making sure you've got enough days within there to make it a worthwhile base, so you're not making wrong decisions on it.
I might add a bit of colour there. I'm in the odd position, and I'll pass to Jack in a second, that I'm chairing and also part of the firm talking. So to your point about real time, whether it's social listening tools, their own first-party data, web traffic, transactions, whatever it is, there's always considerations about representativity, day of the week, cycles, seasonality, that kind of stuff. And of course, with surveys, representativity. The game changer for our clients is moving from wave-based data that's immediately perceived as old, and I'm waiting for the new wave of data, to whatever I go and get is going to be up to date and of the moment. So it's not a question that it's the right data, it's that it's helpful and it's part of the conversation. The game changer is that the opinions of consumers are available as of yesterday, or even in the day part, if that's what the client wants to, as James said, pay for. So it's a psychological shift of how to use the data, and our clients never fail to understand that asking a good sample of people their opinions is better than a signal in a needle in a haystack kind of in the Twitter sphere. But getting access to that data at a point which is useful to make a decision is the challenge. So it's entirely behavioural. And there are things you can do with survey data, rolling data, weighting that data differently, that we all know and love in reporting, that can make that more palatable. But it's that psychological shift which gives a sense of real time, but it's really of the now.
With neither curated reports or researchers delivering the research, I guess, with most of the, not necessarily the analysis, but certainly the storytelling done on the client end, do you ever run into issues with people who are maybe less familiar with research methodologies, interrogating the data, or kind of doing that wrapping up the story side of things?
You'll always run into people that don't understand things. How I would describe it is our key clients are the insight folk, and we are their +1 at the party of the CMO. So we're in there with an insight person who helps translate that into their business. So we're not directly targeting, hey CMO, here's a really funky, cool thing you can do. We're going in with that air of authority, and they have someone, inside who is their trusted partner. So I think that helps negate we're coming up with some crazy ideas. So this is still the market research rigor through that person, but just kind of supercharging it a bit.
So you wouldn't target marketeers directly then? You'd always go via the insights function?
We've had marketeers who have seen us and then made the introduction that way and go, I think this would be a really cool and useful thing for our Arsenal insight person.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions, please?
Okay. The main problem with using Tableau and Power BI, we know it, is that they want database. They want respondent information, and what we provide market research is usually aggregated data, and it's really hard to make Tableau work with market research data. Even if you say all data is complicated, it's particularly hard with market research. So how do you solve that?
We provide respondent level data, and we're able to help them understand how they size bases correctly for particular questions. And the data is dynamically weighted as they're consuming it. So we don't provide aggregated tables. We provide the live stream of what's going on, which we've got 4 global enterprise clients who have all built successful dashboards which are being used daily in their organizations. So it's kind of worked.
Well done.
Hi, thanks. Me again. So this is a question I'm not going to answer myself. That's the road to madness. Although I can. It was for the other James, actually. When you said just then about behaviour, I didn't think this was behaviour. I thought this was attitudes. Because you're tracking advertising in some capacity, so people's response to that. And then you mentioned behaviour. So I don't know if you just misspoke or it is behaviour, because that's, for me, slightly more interesting, because if I knew what people were doing, that would be wonderful.
For the live stream? For the benefit of the listening audience, probably me talking quickly, it's actually the behaviour of the internal client teams I'm talking about, their behaviour of when they choose to use data in their business decision making. When they have a business question, they have, on occasion, I would suggest, not had the latest data, the quarterly results, as we talked about earlier, Paul mentioned campaign reports 6 to 8 weeks later. Our clients are making a decision whether they're going to repeat that campaign based on short-term sales and whether the media agency bought the correct media and it sort of looks all right, committing to that plan ahead of actually diagnosing what's going on. They're ignoring, have previously ignored, survey-based research because it's not available yet. They need data earlier. So it's shifting the opinion of, I can get that data and make a decision, and a behaviour of using it. So really, that's the behaviour I'm looking to change. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, dinner will be served at 1, lunch will be served at 1, so that might give us 12 minutes of freedom. I don't know, what do you think about that? Shall we? Oh, you can wrap up. Right.
Got a little tiny wrap up. Thank you very much, James. Thank you.
I've got 3 mics going on now. Thank you to our speakers, Katie, Jack, Adam and James for the second of our 4 sessions. We're on the home straight. As Matt said, we've got lunch shortly, so feel free to take a stroll outside and get the fresh air. And hopefully you'll agree, some fantastic sessions this morning. I forgot to thank Mike as well, sorry. And this afternoon we've got a few real case studies, and we're wrapping up the day with, I think, some really interesting thoughts for the future. So thanks for all your attention so far. Please enjoy lunch. See you soon.